Genesis Nomad. When Sega launched the Genesis Nomad in 1995, it sounded like every kid's dream. You could play your full library of Sega Genesis games anywhere. But in reality, anywhere meant until your batteries tapped out, which happened rather fast. The Nomad required 6 AA batteries, and under normal use, you'd get just 2 to 3 hours of gameplay. That was with the volume low. Crank it up and that number dropped even further. The culprit was its 3.25-inch backlit LCD screen paired with the full processing power of a home console stuffed into a portable shell. It wasn't energy efficient, but it was trying to run the exact same hardware as your living room Genesis. To make matters worse, the Nomad wasn't small or light, and those 6 AA's made it even heavier. Sega did offer an AC adapter, but that defeated the whole portable concept. While it had the novelty of letting you hook it up to a TV like a regular Genesis, most players remember it for eating through an entire pack of AA's before lunch. For all its ambition, the Nomad was a great idea with a terrible battery life, and that lesson still echoes in handheld design today. Turbo Express. In 1990, NEC tried to leapfrog Nintendo and Sega by creating a handheld that could play full-size TurboGrafx-16 cartridges on the go. The result was the Turbo Express, a portable powerhouse for its time with a crisp backlit color LCD that made the Game Boy look ancient. It was everything a gamer could want. No downgraded ports, no special cartridges, just your home console library in your hands. But in reality, the thing was a battery killer. Running on 6 AA batteries, it lasted barely 2 to 3 hours before going dark, and that's if you were lucky. Part of the problem was the tech itself. The Turbo Express pushed a display resolution listed at around 336 by 221 pixels, far sharper than anything in its handheld competition. That clarity demanded serious power, especially with the constant backlight draining energy non-stop. Add in the fact that it was heavier and bulkier than most portables, and you had a system that was only portable if you carried a backpack full of batteries. To NEC's credit, the Turbo Express was ahead of its time in visuals and performance, but for most players, the excitement wore off fast when the low battery warning flashed in the middle of a game. Game Gear. When Sega released the Game Gear in 1990, it was billed as the color alternative to Nintendo's Game Boy, a backlit, full-color handheld that made monochrome games feel ancient overnight. And it was true. The Game Gear's 3.2-inch screen was gorgeous for its time, capable of showing off detailed sprites and vibrant backgrounds that the Game Boy couldn't touch. But that visual upgrade came at a brutal cost: battery life. The Game Gear ran on 6 AA batteries, just like Sega's later Nomad, and they would only last around 3 to 5 hours. Compared to the Game Boy's up to 30 hours on just 4 AA's, it wasn't even close. The constant backlight and higher processing demands means that even fresh batteries could disappear halfway through a long car trip, and if you dared to use the sound at full volume, you could shave off even more playtime. Sega offered an AC adapter and a rechargeable battery pack, but both turned the handheld into something closer to a plug-in mini console than a true portable. The Game Gear remains beloved for its colorful library, but its battery life became an infamous punchline among 90s kids, and one of the reasons Nintendo kept dominating the handheld market. What's your favorite handheld console? Let me know in the comments. Nintendo Switch 2. When Nintendo unveiled the Switch 2, expectations were sky high. The original was already a sales juggernaut, and this sequel promised more power, a sharper display, and faster performance. Under heavy load and demanding games, early testing showed the Switch 2 could drop to as little as 2 hours of handheld play. That's about the same as some of Nintendo's handhelds from decades past. The cause is straightforward. The upgraded processor and high-resolution screen look fantastic, but they consume power at a blistering rate when pushed to the limit. Battery saver modes can stretch life towards 4 hours, but they usually mean dialing back brightness or performance, taking away some of the next-gen feel. Lighter indie titles or retro games can run longer, but for blockbuster releases, you'll want to keep a charger close. Third-party battery packs are already popping up for players who want longer sessions. In the end, the Switch 2 proves that even in 2025, pushing portable hardware to the edge still comes with a cost. PlayStation Vita. Sony's PlayStation Vita, launched in 2011, was a technical marvel. The original PCH 1000 model boasted a 5-inch OLED touchscreen that delivered vibrant colors and deep blacks unlike anything else in handheld gaming at the time. It had dual analog sticks, a powerful CPU, and even touch controls on the back panel. But that beautiful OLED screen was also its biggest power hog. In real-world use, the Vita's battery lasted only 3 to 5 hours for gaming, sometimes less if you cranked brightness. For media playback like videos or music, you could squeeze out more life, but for gaming, the battery drain was relentless. The non-removable battery made things worse, meaning your only options were an external charger or plugging into a wall mid-session. Sony later replaced the OLED with an LCD in the slimmer PCH 2000 model, partly to improve efficiency, but by then the damage was done. Players loved the Vita for its console-quality visuals on the go, but many also remember the constant anxiety of watching the battery icon dip toward red. It was the classic case of premium hardware outpacing the power technology of its era. Steam-based Windows handhelds. In recent years, devices like the Lenovo Legion Go, MSI Claw, and similar Windows-based handhelds have promised a PC gaming experience in the palm of your hand. And in terms of performance, they deliver, running full modern titles with high settings, large high refresh rate displays, and full desktop OS capabilities. But that power comes at a massive cost. In intensive games, any of these handhelds last barely 2 hours, sometimes even less. The issue isn't just one component, it's everything. These machines use full laptop-grade CPUs and GPUs that draw significant wattage, paired with large, bright screens that demand constant power. Cooling systems have to work harder, which eats into the battery further. While you can lower performance profiles or cap frame rates to extend life, doing so undercuts the selling point of having a portable gaming powerhouse. For light indie games or cloud streaming, you might stretch the battery toward 4 or 5 hours, but for AAA titles, you'll be tethered to a charger almost as often as you're gaming. It's a compromise that makes these devices incredible for short bursts, but impractical for all-day portable play. In the end, they showcase how raw performance still battles against the limits of battery tech. PlayStation Portable. When Sony entered the handheld market in 2004 with the PlayStation Portable, it was a shot across Nintendo's bow. The PSP's 4.3-inch widescreen LCD, UMD movie playback, and console-quality 3D graphics made it feel light years ahead of the Game Boy Advance. But all that power came with a predictable downside. Depending on the model and what you were doing, you could expect anywhere from 3 to 6 hours of gaming on a single charge. The main culprit was the UMD drive, a spinning optical disc reader that demanded constant power. Combine that with the large screen and higher processing needs, and the battery drained far faster than Nintendo's cartridge-based systems. Watching movies or playing graphically demanding games pushed it toward the lower end of its lifespan, while lighter titles could squeeze out a bit more time. Sony eventually released higher capacity batteries and slim models with slightly better efficiency, but the PSP never shook its reputation as a handheld that needed its charger nearby. For all its style and multimedia features, the PSP was a reminder that portable hardware wasn't just about how good it looked, it was about how long it could keep going. Nintendo 3DS. When Nintendo launched the 3DS in 2011, the glasses-free 3D screen was its big selling point. It was a clever gimmick that wowed people in demos, but it also came with a huge energy cost. In full 3D mode, the original 3DS lasted just 3 to 5 hours of gameplay. That's barely enough for a long trip, and a far cry from the DS Lite's 15 to 19 hours. The culprit was that dual screen setup with constant backlighting, plus the extra processing power required for the stereoscopic 3D effect. Even with the 3D slider turned off, the battery life was still modest. Later models like the 3DS XL and new 3DS XL improved things slightly, but they never reached the stamina of earlier Nintendo handhelds. And while the 2DS and new 2DS XL ditched the 3D effect entirely, they still didn't break past about 6 to 7 hours for most games. For players who kept a charger in their bag or played mostly at home, this wasn't a deal breaker. But for anyone hoping to make it through a full travel day in 3D mode, the constant low battery warnings were a harsh reality check. Retroid Pocket 2. The Retroid Pocket 2 built a loyal following in retro gaming circles when it launched in 2020. It was affordable, ran Android, and could emulate everything from NES to Dreamcast games. But while it excelled in versatility, battery life was more of a mixed result. Owners generally report around 3 to 5 hours of play on a single charge, shorter if you're running more demanding emulators or keeping Wi-Fi and Bluetooth active. This estimate isn't from an official spec sheet, but rather from real-world user feedback and reviews across retro gaming forums. The system's battery sounds good on paper, but its chipset and bright 3.5-inch screen draw more power than you might expect for older games. It's perfectly fine for short sessions or casual play, but if you're planning an all-day trip down memory lane, you'll probably be reaching for a power bank before long. Game Boy Micro. Released in 2005 as the last entry in the Game Boy family, the Game Boy Micro was tiny, stylish, and surprisingly powerful for its size. At just 4 inches wide and weighing under 3 ounces, it was the most pocketable Game Boy ever, but its ultra-compact design came with a trade-off, a much smaller battery. Nintendo officially rated the Micro for about 5 to 8 hours of gameplay depending on brightness and volume settings. That was noticeably less than the Game Boy Advance SP, which could often double those numbers. The Micro's bright, crisp screen and swappable faceplates made it a favorite among collectors, but for everyday travel, its shorter playtime meant it wasn't the best pick for marathon gaming sessions. It's a classic example of how shrinking the hardware can sometimes shrink the stamina too. An innovative, stylish send-off for the Game Boy line, but one that struggled to keep up with longer trips away from a charger. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like and subscribe down below for more.